Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. Every morning, Jacob was very happy to go to work because he was doing what he had dreamed of doing since he was a child. He read a lot of medical literature and was already immersed in science before he went to college. For as long as he could remember, he always believed that he would cure and save people. So as soon as he got his medical school diploma, the next day he literally worked in one of the hospitals in the city. The promising young surgeon gladly accepted, and not once after that he did not regret it. From the first day he showed himself to be a qualified specialist, and after a year it was no longer so easy to come to him for surgery. Everyone was literally begging for an appointment with Jacob. He, for his part, was willing to work literally day and night for him and for colleagues who asked him to take over. Everyone knew Jacob was hardened and single, so he readily agreed to devote his free time to his favorite job. Almost everyone on the team respected this intelligent, kind, and compassionate surgeon. He was always willing to help and advise in any matter concerning patients. He cared for each of them with his heart and soul. If there was a particularly difficult operation, he could not leave the hospital for the entire next day until he was sure his ward was well. By the age of 35, Jacob was already a well-known doctor in town, having saved more than a dozen lives. Among his former patients were drivers, school principals, milkmaids, and teachers. Rank, status, and title didn't matter to him. He absolutely fought for every life in the same way and did everything possible, and sometimes the impossible, to help patients. If in his career Jacob got what he wanted, his personal life did not change. He was considered an enviable boyfriend. Many girls admired the handsome brunette. He was truly a handsome man, 6 feet tall, with a very pleasant velvety voice. One of the patients once said, "Jacob, you can treat patients without a scalpel or medicine. As soon as I hear your voice, all the bionics go away." The doctor smiled and jokingly replied, "Antonina, if your hernia would dissolve without surgery, I would even agree to sing at your bedside. But in the meantime, let's take your blood pressure, check your labs, and prepare for the operating room." In the field of surgery, he still had the gift of easy communication. Jacob was able to persuade, reassure, and motivate patients, so that they agreed to any surgical intervention with complete peace of mind. They were all confident of a speedy recovery and had full confidence in the doctor. Knowing that Jacob was willing to spend all his free time within the walls of his beloved institution, his colleagues often took advantage of this. They all knew that they could call on him at any time, day or night, and that he would gladly stand in for them on duty. Vilma and Anna, the elderly nurses, often whispered. Baba Vilma, as they called her in the ward, whispered. What was he going to do alone within 4 walls? If he had a family, children? Well, yes, Anna supported her. At least there was company. With a sigh, she continued, "Don't be afraid. You have never fallen in love." But no one could know what was in the surgeon's past. He never shared it with anyone and remained a mystery to all the single beauties in the hospital. When, once again, determined to take advantage of his kindness, Barbara approached him in the middle of the working day. He smiled and was the first to initiate conversation. "Let me guess, you probably need to take over the night watches." She knew Mushni worked as a truck driver, and when he stopped by unexpectedly, she'd already asked him a couple of times for a substitute, knowing Jacob wouldn't say no. "Thank you. You are my savior, my best buddy friend in the world. When you get married, I'm willing to take over all your shifts for you and your boyfriend next month." Barbara chattered happily and, with a kiss on Jacob's cheek, disappeared. They had had a very cordial and friendly relationship since they had arrived at the hospital at the same time after college. Jacob had never been reluctant to help her, to give her advice or stand in for her if necessary. This time, of course, he did. All the more so since the shift promised to be quiet, the IQ was empty. There were no serious patients or scheduled operations. All tests and appointments were done, so it was safe to immerse himself in the evening in studying new articles on surgery. In the afternoon, Jacob went through all the wards, made sure everything was in order, and headed to the residence room. He spent so much time in the hospital that he even subscribed to magazines in this direction, and once a month he received the medical bulletin, which he studied from cover to cover in all his spare time. Whether on call or at lunchtime, he immersed himself in the study of novelties and achievements in the field of medicine and dreamed of soon defending his thesis. After reading another article, Jacob put the kettle on and was about to have a cup of coffee to cheer himself up, when the phone rang and he picked it up to hear. "Jacob, I'm Alice, the on-call nurse on the gynecology service. We have a 27-year-old laboring woman who needs surgery. A cesarean section is necessary, and suction is necessary, and so is your consultation. Your presence?" The hospital used to call in surgeons from other wards when there was a need for surgery, so Jacob was not surprised and responded right away. "I'll be right with you. Prepare the patient for the operation." Looking sadly at the boiling kettle, she unplugged the appliance and headed for the exit. Going up to the top floor, where the gynecology department was located. Almost at the door, she met Robert, the doctor on duty in this department. He spoke to him briefly about the patient. Without weapons, she was a young and perfectly healthy woman, and the only difficulty was that 3 babies were going to be born at the same time. I decided not to risk it. I could have taken care of one by myself, but in this case, I wouldn't need surgery. I'm sorry I threw the night away, said Robert, smiling. But Jacob, as always, had an easy answer. "Robert, what are you talking about? You know I love my job and she loves me. Every shift, there's an operation. Come on, let's go, or Mom is going to have 3 on her own without any help from us." After a quick change of clothes, they entered the delivery room. As soon as Jacob saw the woman's face, he could barely keep himself from screaming, or worse, fainting. Luckily, his help wasn't needed at that moment, or he wouldn't have been able to grab the instrument. As the anesthesiologist attended to the patient, Jacob's thoughts drifted back to the distant past. Once, when he was a student, he had been madly in love. Jacob had met his love when he was a senior in high school. She had come to see her friend, Jacob's classmate, and Jacob was speechless when he saw the frail silhouette in the sunlight on the high school porch. Royce struck him then as an ethereal, slight woman, not only in appearance but also in communication. Short in stature, with a long braid and sky-blue eyes, she seemed to have charmed Jacob from the first seconds. He started looking for every possible, impossible way to see her. Even his parents noticed that their son had changed a lot. Mom couldn't stand it one day when her son came home late. In the evening, humming happily to herself, she asked him quietly, "Son, aren't you in love? Maybe we should prepare for your wedding, but we have no idea. At least you've met your sweetheart." Jacob hugged his mother tenderly, kissed her, and then, jokingly pulling her away, said, "And why not? I'll bring it tomorrow, so you'll have to wait." She, upon learning of the impending meeting, panicked. Being a modest and shy girl, she said shyly, "Jacob, I still don't know if they like me, and your parents are the most famous people in town. Who am I?" Jacob's family was very famous. His father had been a head doctor in a hospital, now retired, and a consultant in a private clinic. His mother had worked for many years as head of the central pharmacy, was from the countryside, and his parents lived very modestly. Father and mother worked on the farm for pennies, but in truth they saved the household. With just a smile, she replied, "Roy's, but how can you not like it? Don't make it up." He put his arm around her and whispered, "You'll see they, like me, will love you from the first moment, and we will surely get married." At that moment, I could not imagine what was really going to happen. The mother and father greeted the next day with joy, but the joy was false. Within half an hour of chatting, having learned all that the girl needed, so to speak, from her family, Her mother asked Jacob to help her in the kitchen to arrange the tea. As soon as he entered, her mother began to whisper with some annoyance. "Son, it's not us hillbillies. To her you've been raised, you've been educated. Think of the future ahead of you. You may become a famous surgeon, and if a simpleton will be a worthy wife for such a man, understand, she will only pull you down, not give you a chance to do science. The first year, she gives birth to you. A lot of children and thoughts about medicine will turn into thoughts about where to earn money to support the family. You should know that your father and I are strongly opposed to such a daughter-in-law." "And I love it. You and Daddy will like it too. Come on, let's hurry up with the delicious cake and cups," Jacob replied, and picking up everything his mother had put on the table, took it into the bedroom, making it clear that the conversation was over. But it wasn't. From that day on, his mother began to pretend they didn't exist every time. They met or kept persuading her son to separate from the simpleton. As the saying goes, water is cool. After a while, Jacob himself began to wonder if they were right for each other. More and more fights and misunderstandings began to arise between him and them. After another conflict, the girl cried and said, "You know, after we went to your parents' house, it's like there's a cat between us. You're always unhappy about something, like you're only looking for the bad in me. I can't take it anymore. Let's not see each other for a while, and then you can decide if you want what your mother says, little brother." He paused and then added, "Your mother even found out where I work to come to my store and tell me what the future holds for you and how I'm going to stand in your way. She said a hick like me belongs behind the counter, not in life next to you. So I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." Jacob tried to stop her, but apparently he wasn't very convincing, and she left. They never saw each other again. He tried to reach Royce the next day through his girlfriend at work, but the answer was the same everywhere. She gathered her things and told him not to look. Jacob kept looking for her for a while, but she had disappeared. He even began to speculate that she had gone to her homeland or to another city, but he didn't know anything for sure. Studying, defending his degree, had become so hard for him that he didn't even have time to sleep. Jacob wanted to drive to the town where Ani's parents were, but he couldn't find the time. Jacob graduated and got a job at the hospital, but he couldn't stop thinking about the woman he loved. He tried to put the past behind him and even married one of his patients. Holly, from her first day at the hospital, had taken a special interest in the young surgeon. Jacob was then in his first year on the ward, and the persistent beauty had her way. After her recovery and discharge, they began dating, and 6 months later she too took things smoothly, to the point that Jacob himself didn't understand why she had proposed to him. It wasn't that he didn't feel anything at all. There was a crush that would pass with time, but his soul was silent. Or rather, he simply, like his heart, still loved only Royce. The wedding with Holly decided not to be loud, pompous. It was his second marriage, so he said up front, "Honey, I don't need a veil or a white dress. Let's go to a restaurant and rest somewhere." He agreed, as he always did in their relationship. Holly took the reins of all domestic issues and their solutions, and was able to solve them, sometimes without Jacob's knowledge. Mom and Dad were glad to meet the bright and active girl of the sun. From the first minutes they gave their consent to the marriage, although at that time it was not even talked about yet. The mother followed the beaten path, and when she brought Holly to meet her, the mother called her son to help her, apparently with the tea. She whispered cheerfully, unlike their past interaction, "Son, this is your destiny. God has sent you happiness as if on command. Intelligent, spectacular, promising. Marry right away. It's your destiny." Financial, assistant manager of one of the banks, a spectacular blonde with lush curls, slender figure, and refined facial features, and made many men turn after her. Once again, Mom's word was not the least of her worries, and she convinced Jacob to get married. The marriage registration was a quiet affair, followed by dinner at a small but very cozy restaurant. The celebration took place in a small circle. Holly's parents were working somewhere overseas and said they would congratulate the young couple upon their arrival. Jacob's parents were at the reception, smiling happily, looking at their son and some friends of the bride and groom. After the wedding, they went to see almost immediately, at Holly's insistence, but Jacob didn't like the way she flirted with men whenever she could, to which she just guffawed. "Jacob, I'm just trying to make you jealous. I don't care who I smile at. I care who I run off to bed with at night. And that's for you, my good man." At times like this, Jacob found himself thinking that if anyone dared to show any sign of affection, he'd kill anyone dared to show any sign of affection. He'd kill anyone. And with Holly, he was rather uncomfortable. Uncomfortable because in front of him, she could easily allow herself to forget he existed and get chatty with another strange man, smile at him, dance with him. And it was as if her husband remained distant. But Jacob didn't even feel much jealousy, nor did he feel love. At first there was passion, but eventually it went from a year to a year and a half. Family life went on as usual. Breakfast in the morning, good morning, work, dinner at home, or sometimes at a restaurant. But as time went on, Holly stayed at work longer and longer, and more often came home after midnight. Jacob began to suspect that no lover had shown up. "You know, after we went to your parents' house, it's like there's a cat between us. You're always unhappy about something, like you're only looking for the bad in me. I can't take it anymore. I mean, let's not do this yet," but strangely nothing stirred in his soul. And this time he started thinking about his first love more often. Family life with Holly. He could see that she was going from being a faithful, devoted, seeming wife to a public figure, giving interviews to local newspapers and magazines as the wife of an up-and-coming surgeon. For everyone who came home late, there was always an answer. "But Jacob, you can't have a doctor's wife like you, looking frumpy, unattractive. So I went to the salon for a spa and ran to the store to pick out something new. By the way, finance day is coming up, and I'll probably have to go on a date or corporate retreat." She reached out to kiss her husband's hand, but he was fed up with all the lying and mouthing off. With a wave of his hand, Jacob retreated to his room. He had been thinking about divorce for some time, and more often, he thought about the bathhouse. He saw it everywhere, in the streets, in transport, even in his dreams at night. When his wife's brazenness became too much, and sometimes she didn't even come home at night, Jacob decided to ask for a divorce. Holly didn't want children, so everything went quickly and smoothly. By then, the ex-wife had already found a wealthy businessman, and without hiding her contempt for divorce said, "I thought you were a star, the brightest, and you're going to rot in this urban clinic. Sorry, I have other plans for life. Good luck, Ibolita." Jacobo finally saw his ex-wife without masks or deception, and even seemed relieved. Now he could look for his beloved Rosa with a clear conscience. He even knew who would help him in this. There were so many experts from different fields among friends. Surgeons saved lives, that it was enough to cut out the business cards left with a request for contact, and any problem could be solved. Jacob tried not to take advantage of it, but this time he could not do without the help of a professional. He remembered that not long ago he had operated on a detective from a private agency. He had been brought in with suspected appendicitis, and already in the waiting room his appendix burst. And if it hadn't been for Jacob, who was on duty, no one knows if he would have survived or not. That's a detective. That operation was a very difficult one, and the chances of life were obviously not 100%. But the experienced surgeon quickly brought John, as the detective had been called in the past, back to his senses. John was a criminal police officer and was highly regarded in the department for his ability to literally get the information he needed from the ground. John had been involved in a number of operations and was constantly jokingly exclaiming in the room, What a pain in the ass. Some inflamed bowel took him to the hospital, but now apart from the battle scars, they were the simple, so to speak, everyday scars. He was grateful to the doctor, and now it was time to ask for the promised help. Jacob was delighted to hear from the surgeon. "Thank you very much for my life. What can I do for you?" They arranged to meet at a nearby cafe, where Jacob told them he wanted to find his former lover. "You see, I was so silly at the time it seemed like a great future in surgery, the need for new knowledge. And then there was the idea of getting married, and Royce really wanted to have kids right away, the kind of mom and dad or ears that hurt the village. Well, it all added up. Then she disappeared. I got a new job. Everything was like a whirlwind. John, having taken all the necessary information, promised to be sure to help the rescuer, only to ask already leaving. She hadn't gone into town, so maybe she was staying with her parents, unaware of anything. Jacob swallowed saliva, his voice pasty. "No, I'm ashamed to admit it, but in the year we had known each other, not once had I known where she came from. All I knew was that she had come from the woods of some almost abandoned town. I was in a rented apartment where she lived, but the landlady didn't know anything about her. She didn't show up for work either, so I checked. Now I have to keep looking." John later told the surgeon that he would make sure to find his loved one. From time to time, he would call Jacob to confirm some details and keep him informed. Each time he would let him know if he heard anything new. One day John called and said we should meet. Everything in Jacob's soul felt icy, and he couldn't wait for the appointed time. Excitement. He arrived at the coffee shop where they had arranged to meet well before the agreed time, and was already finishing his third cup of green tea when the detective appeared. He took a seat at the table and asked the waiter to bring coffee. Without pausing, Jacob started first. "Please tell me she's okay. I don't care if she is married or not, as long as she is alive and well." It was as if he had a premonition, and his heart clenched and wouldn't let go. He could see that John was having a hard time initiating this conversation. He took a few sips of coffee and, after a moment of silence, held out the envelope. When Jacob pulled out the photo, the first was a memorial with the profile of his beloved and the dates of her birth and death. He didn't have time to find her. A stupid car accident ended the life of his beloved. She is buried in one of the cemeteries. On the back of the photo is the address, the number of the place where she is buried. John says he was on his way to work that day and was at the bus stop waiting for transportation. The drunk driver of the minibus lost control and crashed into the bus stop at full speed. It was early in the morning, and there were not many people. 2 people were unharmed. One girl went to the hospital with a concussion, and her Royce was the first to hit the road and died on the spot from her injuries. At that moment, only one thought was beating in the doctor's mind. That day in the cafe, Jacob had pointed out that the last chance to be happy to love was now firmly buried under that stone slab with the profile of his beloved. He could no longer remember how long he had sat there, nor how John had left. The tears seemed endless. In the morning, he bought a huge bouquet of white roses and went to the cemetery. "But here we are, my love," Jacob said softly, placing the roses on the headboard of the bed. "This is not how I imagined our meeting. I'm sorry, my love. I dreamed of mending the vein of youth, but God and time have decided otherwise. Forgive me if you can. I still love only you." He remained seated in the cemetery for several hours, and only when the caretaker approached him and asked, "You're all right?" he came out as if he had come to. Jacob was walking along, immersed in his bitter thoughts, when he heard a plaintive, alternately hissing chirp next to the garbage can. Outside the cemetery, 2 scruffy, dirty dogs cornered a small red-haired kitten and tried to loosen their claws to reach it with their paws. They would have torn the little guy to shreds, but Jacob quickly came to the rescue. Grabbing a stick from the ground, he brandished it menacingly at the mongrel. "Come on, let's get out of here." And what did the two of them think against the little one? They scattered at once, the litter pacing in the wind, eyes twinkling frighteningly, as if it had no idea what to do. Jacob picked up the kitten and said in a low voice, "Well, my dear friend, that must be how Anushka leaves me a memory of herself, for you are as helpless as she once was. Come, let's go home. I'll wash you. I'll feed you, and you shall be my friend." That's what I'll call you, friend, by the way. Jacob, it's your turn to help. Robert brought him back to reality from his memories. Jacob, a true professional, knew how to control his emotions and performed the operation perfectly. The two boys and their fragile baby sister were born. When Jacob returned to the room that night, he couldn't sleep for a minute. He saw the painfully familiar face of the laboring woman. He wanted so badly to believe that mistakes like this were possible in life, and that there was a chance that his beloved was alive. Could it be, he thought at the time, that something had happened to cause a completely different honey child to be buried there, in the cemetery? But why didn't she know him? Maybe she didn't want to know him, because he had betrayed her. In the morning, she decided to go back to gynecology, supposedly to see how the patient and the babies were doing. But she decided to look at the file. The data of the young mother did not match those of her beloved surname. First name others, and in the column of relatives there were dashes. She was an orphan. The man held the card in his hands and could not understand how it was possible for two completely unrelated people to have such an outward resemblance. At that moment, Robert entered the office. "Oh, buddy, you're up. Don't worry, everything's fine with Mom. The little ones and I have done a wonderful job, so we're entitled to coffee. Coffee's on me." He winked at me and continued, "Because without you, I would not have accepted this trinity so quickly." They went downstairs where the cafeteria was and spent half an hour talking about everything. When Jacob got back to the living room, his mind kept going round and round about motherhood. Almost everything that had crossed his mind. He even decided Rosata could indeed have been a twin sister. They could have been separated as children, for example, by parents unable to raise two at the same time. One, for example, was left in a maternity home. She even thought of faking or stealing one of the babies there. When he returned home that day, not even the faithful companion recognized his master. Jacob arrived melancholy, lost in his own thoughts. He didn't pour the usual amount of milk into his friend's bowl, just patted it and headed into the room. Only when the clever creature, as he thought he was, began to chase the empty dishes across the floor in search of his food. "Oh, well, I had completely forgotten. Sorry, dear friend, let's make it up to you," said the host and entered the kitchen. "That's where we serve the milk," he added. "Sorry, I have other things on my mind. I owe you milk and treats." But he rubbed gratefully at his master's feet, as if delighted with the change of mood. Jacob sometimes seemed to understand him, and when he came home from work, he often talked to his pet. That night, despite his tiredness, Jacob hardly slept at all. He stayed up waiting for daybreak. After much deliberation, he decided that in the first 3 minutes of the next working day, he would go to see yesterday's birth mother and try to find out everything, to continue living in the dark, speculating. He couldn't do that. He might go crazy. In the morning, he barely waited for the weekly briefing to end, made the rounds of his patients, and immediately rushed upstairs. Jacob, trying to contain his excitement, entered the room, stepping on cotton legs. The patient appeared to be asleep, but opened her eyes at the sound of his footsteps. "Good morning. My name is Jacob Vladimirovich. I am a surgeon, and yesterday I helped deliver your babies. By the way, congratulations on the birth of the beautiful Trinity." He smiled, not knowing how to continue the conversation. "Monica, that was the patient's name," said cheerfully. "Thank you very much. I don't remember, of course, as I was under the effects of anesthesia, but the babies have seen today. Thank you again," Jacob said, at a loss. You're welcome. Feel better. All the words he had prepared beforehand flew out of his head as he saw the familiar and still beloved features on her face. He was about to walk away, but suddenly stopped, turned around, and asked, "Monica, do you have a sister by any chance?" Her face changed, her eyes widened in shock or surprise, and she asked quietly, "I had a twin sister, but she died about 7 years ago. An accident, a car accident to be exact." Jacob sat in a chair next to the bed and, seeing that she was about to burst into tears, tried to calm her down. "Please don't worry, you cannot. Please tell me about you and your sister. I really need it." Monica, after a brief silence, began to tell in a low voice how many years ago, when her father died, the three of them stayed in a small town far away, in an old house inherited from her grandmother. The mother was always sick. There was no work to do except for the small farm. They had a cow, a couple of pigs, and a dozen chickens. When Monica's sister finished school, she couldn't stand the poverty, as she said, and went to the city to earn money. I felt sorry for my mother, for at that time my sister seemed to think only of herself, not of her. Later, after her death, I realized that she wanted to do something for all of us. She sent money regularly, but we never talked, which I felt very gorilla, like afterwards. She fell silent and turned her back to the wall, and remained silent for a while. Then, she continued, "I knew that my sister had gotten a job in town as a sales clerk, and even got herself a boyfriend in town. But that didn't matter to me at the time. My mother was getting worse and worse. Cancer rarely lets someone survive. But I had a lot of hope and help. I had to sell all my animals. I didn't have time to take care of them anyway, and I needed money for medicine for my mother. But life treated our family differently. It turned out that Mom had also survived Royce. Tears ran slowly down her cheek as if she wanted to talked. The news of Royce's death was like a knife in my heart, and my mother began to fade before my eyes. 6 months later, I buried her. God, I thought I would never get over it. I was so lost, alone in the world, and didn't know how to move on." She was silent again, and Jacob was afraid to look him in the eye because he was the hometown boyfriend and the traitor who had traded love for a career. But she couldn't admit it. Monica talked at length that day, as if she had been waiting for that moment. Jacob learned that after the death of his sister's mother, Monica had been left alone in a ramshackle old house in town, where there was hardly any life. Once big and beautiful with its school, its store, its farm, it had become a ruin, with literally 10 residential houses, and a few times a week a caravan would arrive. The good thing is that twice a day a bus passed through her village, the center of the district. That's where Monica found her job. She would get up at 4 a.m. to catch the bus in half an hour, and at 6 p.m. she was in a hurry to catch the bus back. The market where she got the job didn't pay much money, although there was enough to live on. But it seemed the death of her loved ones was not the only thing that fate had in store for Monica. One day, when she came home from work, all she could see at her home site was a burnt log, an epic chimney. Most likely, an unburned coal had fallen through the furnace flap, which was enough to make the old house crumble. With it also burned the past life of Monica, who was forced to leave the village. In the city, she almost immediately rented a small room on the outskirts. All her savings were worth. The room was in a communal apartment with 2 other neighbors. One turned out to be a small but rather spry granny, also named Monica. She was overjoyed when she found out who the new tenant would be. "What a joy for my old age. Now we will be the 2 monkeys having tea in the afternoons." I couldn't talk to my old roommate, who drinks, sleeps, so she fell asleep. And in the other rooms, Vaska is always on some business trip, and Sashka only comes here when he fights with his girlfriend. So within 5 minutes of crossing the threshold of the communal apartment, Monica knew all the tenants at once. At first she felt a little uncomfortable knowing that there was a dead person in her room. It wasn't that dead people scared her. Since her mother's death, she was more relaxed about it. It was just that the room seemed a little cold to her. But on the first day, having cleaned up and thrown away the rest, by evening she was satisfied with the job done. The room sparkled, and Monica also pulled out an old but clean curtain and tablecloth from somewhere. When she found out about the burnt house while they were having tea, she brought in a few more sets of faded but good quality linens and a couple of towels in the evening. There, that should do for now, and then we'll think of something else. At this point, Monica was close to tears. She felt so familiar with her grandmother. It wasn't because of the belongings she had brought, but because of the special care she had for the stranger. However, they began to care for each other as close people. Monica almost immediately took a job as a sales clerk in a grocery store and always tried to take care of the kind neighbor by buying the necessary groceries for both of them. Having lost her grandmother at a very young age and having no one close to her, Monica quickly grew attached to her, and Monica quickly grew fond of her. God gave her no grandchildren of her own, and her only son was an officer serving somewhere far to the north. He came very seldom, but helped his mother regularly. Monica often remembered her son and daughter-in-law with a kind of sadness in her voice. She did not like to talk about it much, but one night she spoke openly. He lived to be 30, never married, and was a nurse in his new unit. He used to come every vacation, but when that girl showed up, he started sending money. But he only came once, and then he said he thought he wasn't allowed to go on leave. No, I'm not offended. It's a young person's thing. Although he's not very good at giving birth, I don't know what the reason was, but we never had grandchildren. After that night, seeing how difficult it was for Monica to talk about it, she tried to avoid the subject. They lived like that, taking care of each other. In the morning, she would make him porridge and whisper to him, "I have to get up early anyway. I have to work all day on an empty stomach. Young people need strength. Come on, eat your porridge with me, since I can make it on my own." But one morning, Monica did not find her grandmother in the kitchen, and the room was suspiciously quiet. The little girl felt a shiver inside, and knocking on her neighbor's door, she called out softly, "Monica, are you asleep?" There was a silence in the room that made Monica's heart pound with fear. She panicked, but when she opened the door, she saw her neighbor in bed and ran to her. She was too late. Just as he touched her arm, she immediately pulled his. It was clear that there was nothing he could do. The doctor on duty in the ambulance pronounced her dead, and as he left, he said in a distant voice, "Luckily, she died in her sleep." She did not torment herself or others. She simply fell asleep, and that was it. It was as if she felt jealous of the deceased, although at that moment it was Monica herself who was taking care of her. She had cried all night long, for now she was alone again. She longed to be her neighbor, to have a child, but Monica was empty again, without a soul in the world to call her own. But life went on, and she too got up in the morning, only now there was no one to cook porridge, and she went to work. Back, not to dinner with tea and conversations about the day gone by, as she had done with Monica Ivanovna, but to her lonely world in a small room in the suburbs. One day, everything changed abruptly. One day, a customer literally walked from the entrance to the counter where Monica was standing. With a mysterious smile, she said, "You won't believe it, last night I saw you in a dream. I asked you your name, and you are so mysterious, you say your name is Alice." Monica, as if hypnotized, blurted out, "It's not Alice, it's Monica." Apparently, at this point, realizing he was falling for a clever ruse, he blushed. She continued enthusiastically, "Well, now I know the name of such a beautiful woman, and I'm Michael." He reached out to shake her hand, but when Monica shyly held out her hand in return, he abruptly turned her palms down and kissed it, like no one had ever kissed her hand before. Everything Mikhail said next ceased to make sense. Monica was in love from the first minutes because no one had ever said anything like that to her before. In the evening, he was already waiting outside the store with a bouquet of flowers. They wandered around the night city for a long time. From the first minute, the cheerful black-eyed boy won the heart of the simple villager. Every day she looked forward to the sunset because she was sure that Michael would be there. Already at the door of the store, they started dating, and a week later he moved in with her, and they started living together. Everything seemed to be going great. Mikhail was kind and loving and tried to help around the house. One problem was that he didn't go to work like the others. At any mention of the subject, he tried to avoid it. In those moments, he would kiss Monica and say, "But don't I bring money home, or don't we have enough? I'm doing everything I can to make sure you don't need anything, my love." But Monica felt that Miguel was hiding something. The girl had an uneasy feeling in her soul. Mikhail was always hiding something from her, and she could leave in the middle of the night saying, "Darling, I have to go to work. I'll tell you about it in the morning." The girl, not understanding anything, waited for him all night, and in the morning he said that he had a job and wanted to rest. At such times, it was impossible to get a word out of him. After work, he sometimes came back happy and gave Monica presents and money, but lately he was as angry as a dog, and for a few days he was as black as a cloud. One day, when he returned, he fell on his knees weeping before her and, kissing her, began to speak vaguely. "Monica, my dear, thank you. They're going to kill me." It turned out that her lover was an avid gambler. That's what he used to go out at night, and that's where the money that came into the house sometimes came from. But it turned out that there was a lot more to lose, and he owed a huge sum of money. When he said how much she owed, Monica realized she couldn't even earn that much in a year in her store. But she loved Mikhail very much and would do anything for him. I had never had so much money in my life. If my parents' house had been intact, I could have earned something, but I could have sold it. But you know I have nothing and nowhere to get it. Tears ran down the girl's cheeks from dinner and helplessness. But Mikhail said he had already figured it all out and had thought of everything. She quickly began to tell Monica how many women give birth to children for others, thus helping unhappy couples doomed to childlessness. She was amazed at how he could offer her such things so calmly. She had no idea that she could give birth to someone she didn't love and sell the child for money. But he knew what. Of course, they wouldn't kill you for your debts. It's just a matter of becoming a surrogate mother to someone else's baby with Echo's help. You'll eat and drink at someone else's expense for the entire pregnancy, and you'll get a lot of money up front. I've got it all figured out. It's enough to pay off your debt, and there's still more left over. Monica hesitated for a while, but Mikhail managed to convince the village idiot to take the step. He even took care of all the arrangements himself, quickly finding a decent couple, Maria and Ragnar, which was the name of the parents. To-be were in their early 40s, and after meeting Monica, they immediately became friends with her. As soon as the girl managed to get pregnant with Echo's help, they surrounded her with attention, bought her all the best things, rented a nice big double apartment in the center of the city, convinced her to quit her job and receive, as they said, only positive emotions. She didn't even think it was possible to live like that. The girl slept, walked, and knitted, something she had not done in a long time. Maria and Ragnar rejoiced like children when they learned of the pregnancy, and almost immediately paid Monica a large part of the agreed amount. The girl thought it had been Mikhail who had tried, and somehow managed to cheat them as well. The couple had unhesitatingly paid almost the entire amount at once, despite the fact that partial payments had originally been agreed upon. At this point, Jacob noticed that the narrator looked tired, either from excitement or from the long conversation, and asked, "You don't look well. Why don't you rest and continue in a little while?" But the patient, as if she feared he was really leaving, shook her head negatively, and then, smiling sadly, said, "No, no, not at all. It makes me feel better because it had been a long time since I had talked to anyone so openly. Not since Monica's death." After taking a sip of water from a bottle on the bedside table, she continued the story. Mikhail turned out to be a scoundrel and disappeared the same day as soon as Ragnar brought the money, saying he would accept the debt and come right back. He disappeared not only behind the closed door of the apartment, but also from Monica's life. But these were not all the difficulties that awaited me on the road of life. At the first ultrasound, I learned that I was carrying not one, but 3 babies for the parents. To be. Maria and Ragnar were happy. Learning the news made the little girl smile even more, as if she remembered what she looked like. The couple had completely changed Monica's wardrobe, which had nothing for the winter except a coat and a jacket. They bought a fur coat, a bunch of dresses, blouses, and other outfits. Maria enjoyed watching Monica try on the outfits. She said, "You have to have the best of everything because you are going to make us very happy." We didn't guess that we would be parents 3 times at once. At that moment, Monica interrupted the story, and her eyes filled with tears again. Jacob could barely keep himself from rushing to her, hugging her. At that moment, he was willing to give anything to stop that small, fragile woman from crying again. The doctor no longer thought that this was not his former lover, but a completely different person. He suddenly realized that he was madly in love with that fragile and helpless woman lying in the hospital bed. At that moment, Monica continued, "It would have been nice. I tried to forget Michael and move on. But the thing is that 3 months ago, Maria and Ragnar disappeared. They stopped coming and stopped contacting each other. I panicked. Okay, I have one more, but now I have 3 children on my hands. Well, the apartment was paid for in advance and I managed to save something. Well, if they've changed their minds about having triplets, that's fine. I'll raise them somehow. It's just frustrating. Why is all this unhappiness happening to me?" Jacob had already decided, after listening to most of Monica's life, that he would never abandon her and would help her with everything. The next day, when he entered the room, he saw the patient sobbing, the doctor's heart filled with compassion. He rushed over and hugged her. Surprisingly, Monica pressed against his chest and cried even harder. Come on, he said, trying to calm her down. "What happened to kill you? Everything will be all right." But Monica, pulling away abruptly to hold back tears, said, "I'm sorry, it won't work. One of the babies has a heart defect and needs a lot of money for surgery." But why? Why is this happening to me again? When Monica calmed down a bit, Jacob went to the residence room. There, thanks to him, the one who delivered the baby, he learned all about the baby's condition, back in the ward after talking. The man promised Monica that he would definitely find a way out, and they would save the child. In a couple of days, they would discharge the young mother. Only 2 babies were being prepared. The third was to be checked by the doctors before the operation. Every day since he had met Monica, Jacob had been unable to think of anything else but them. He no longer had any idea what would happen if he didn't see Sully for a single day, so he made the decision not to be around. The day he was discharged, he walked into the room first thing in the morning and had the courage to say, "Monica, I know we don't know each other very well, but I really want to help you. I'm asking you to move in with the kids here. I have a beautiful apartment, Holly, and the tenants are not just me and the cat." She smiled sadly and added, "The 2 of us could handle the little ones and any problems more easily. Besides, I'm a doctor, which can be useful to us again and again." He took her hand and looked pleadingly into her eyes. In those moments, what he feared most was that she would refuse. Monica was silent for a minute and then asked in a low voice, "It must be an inconvenience. Why are you a burden?" Jacob was so glad that it wasn't a refusal. He squeezed her hand even tighter and replied in a low voice, "What a burden you are. You are a blessing. Maybe this is what I've been waiting for all my life, and the rest of the why and what for, I'll be sure to answer only at home." "Good," she smiled and nodded. At that moment, Jacob was the happiest man in the world because it meant that she would be by his side every morning, noon and night. That very day, he was happy to open the door of his apartment to the woman who had become his family in such a short time. "But this is your home now," Jacob said quietly as he let her in. "Sorry, there's no nursery yet, but I'll be sure to remodel one of the baby rooms." But Monica looked at him with such appreciation that she realized she would stay even if there was only one room on the floor. In the evening, after putting the little ones to bed, they sat for a long time in the kitchen, and already Jacob was telling everything straight out. He began with how he had met his sister, how they had loved each other. Then he told her sadly how Royce had been rejected by his parents, wishing he had a better educated bride, and of course, he regretted his betrayal. "I cannot forgive myself for choosing to serve medicine among my beloved careers, listening to my parents rather than my heart. After all, perhaps if I had married Roysat then, she would still be alive." When she finished, she tried to look away so Monica wouldn't see the tears. All the while she listened in silence, not saying a word. For a moment, Jacob came to fear that Monica would accuse him of all his grave sins and refuse to stay under the same roof with him. But she, who listened attentively, put her hand on Jacob's arm, nervously twirling the teaspoon throughout the evening. "Royce, there's no going back, but I think as a twin sister, I have a right to give you forgiveness for her." Smiling sadly, she stroked Jacob's hand so gently that he felt at once reassured, as if Anushka had truly forgiven him. The doctors in the practice, hearing about the new family, had turned their heads and murmured behind his back, saying that the man had lost his loneliness. So many unmarried beauties pined for him, and he chose a hick with 3 children. But Jacob didn't care about the gossip. He had already realized that he was in love and would do anything for Monica and the children. His priority now was to help a sick baby. But since he didn't know he needed a lot of money, there was nowhere to get it. At some point it literally dawned on him when he returned. After work he told Monica at the front door, "I know who can help us with the money for the operation. I have a patient I once saved. He's an excellent detective. Yeah, I told you about him. Scene was the one who found out all about Roysat and his death from me." When he saw the look of bewilderment in her eyes, he didn't give her a moment's hesitation, asking him to find him, his missing businessman. Even if they had changed their minds, I don't think they would refuse to help save one of them. The sleuth was delighted to meet his new savior, and when he learned that his search could save someone's life, he quickly found all the information he needed. It just didn't bring joy to anyone. Not only had the couple disappeared 3 months earlier, but the irreparable had happened. That day there was terrible ice, and Kirill, unable to take the controls, jumped into the oncoming lane. The driver of the truck against which they collided did not even have time to brake. The businessman's car with his wife was strewn all over the road. There was no chance of survival. After listening to John, Jacob was lost. He was already thinking about how to tell Monica, but the detective continued, "Doctor, it's not that serious. There is a possibility, like I once had. What happens is that Ragnar's elderly parents stayed behind, and to them went all the fortune of their dead son. He handed them a piece of paper with the address on it. It's not far, in a rural village. Do you want me to take you there? There's no time to lose. We have to save the baby, take every chance we can." They went straight to the address. Instead of expecting to see a huge mansion preserved by cameras, on paper a very neat 2-story house awaited them, with a solid wooden fence and the most ordinary door, with no codes or guards. As they rang the doorbell, hung on a pegboard, evidently weatherproof, they saw the porch light come on. But who could stay out at night? They're stern. What are you, swindlers? Extortionists. Then you are in the wrong place. Let's get out of here. Our son couldn't have children, and he certainly didn't send us any. She was about to leave, but Jacob quickly began to talk about the surrogate mother and how she had been left without the protection of funds with 3 children, one of whom needed an operation. The landlord listened quietly and also said sternly, "Come inside. Only I myself will tell my wife everything first. I will sit in the kitchen and then, God willing, her heart will be able to bear the news. We will decide what to do next." John and Jacob sat in silence. It was reassuring to know that, God forbid, they would get help right away. But the elders were different. Quickly, after about 10 minutes, Ragnar's parents came out and sat down at the table in front of the guests. The woman was the first to start the conversation, trying to remain calm. "No one spoke to us about the idea of someone else having children. Ragnar must have expected, as always, to surprise us. But life had another plan." Her husband interrupted her and said more calmly than at the meeting, "We, the boys, will help with the operation, the treatment, of course. But we have to make sure that they are our children, Maria and Ragnar." John joined the conversation. "Of course, we will come tomorrow. Documents, receipts, evidence that the children's mother has yes, and DNA testing can be done at any time." The money for the boys' operation was already in the account that evening, so the next afternoon he was transferred from the operating room to the intensive care unit. Monica and Jacob took turns visiting the baby and even brought the new grandparents once to see their rescued grandson. To everyone's surprise, the strong, dominant-looking grandfather was the first to cry, but his wife just took care of him. After the hospital, Jacob suggested they go home to meet the rest of the grandchildren. After some hesitation, the parents agreed. An hour later, they had their grandson and granddaughter in their arms and were crying with happiness. As they left that day, Ragnar's mother, Maria Vladimirovna, approached Monica, hugged her, and said, "Thank you, my dear. You have brought us back to life with your grandfather. We are old enough to take on such a responsibility, how to educate a grandchild, but smart enough not to deprive ourselves of messages with them. We, in turn, will help you in everything. We thought we were alone in the world. Ragnar was all we had. Monica thanked him for helping the baby and promised to bring the children as often as possible. And so she did." She and Jacob began visiting the elderly regularly and taking their grandchildren with them. When they were a little older, Jacob did this often at Mary's request. Maria brought the noisy Trinidad for the whole weekend. They set the whole house on its ear, as the happy grandfather used to say, and kissed their grandfather used to say, and kissed their grandfather and grandmother goodbye. They left when the children were a year old. Jacobo proposed to Monica, and she said, shy as a schoolgirl, "Of course," I said, "yes, we couldn't live without you." She pressed herself against his chest so tightly that Jacob almost choked. It wasn't so much the strength of his embrace as the love he felt for her. They decided to get married quietly, without fuss, and wax friends in a circle, and after the wedding, just go to the village to the cottage. Especially for the time of registration, Trinity Noisy was supposed to stay there at his grandparents' house. The day before the wedding, Monica hugged her beloved and asked him, "What about your parents? Are they alive? Why don't you ever talk about them?" Jacob told me that he rarely called them to find out if they were well, if they were in good health. But communication was strained. I could not forgive them for being separated and then dying. After listening to him, the frail but apparently very wise Monica said, "Beloved, you must forgive them and invite them to join us. After all, they have no idea that they will now be grandparents like Ragnar's parents." Jacob thought about Monica's words, and deep down he agreed with her. But it was not easy after so many years of strained relationships. In life, however, it turned out to be more important to take the first step. Her parents, who had just learned of her impending wedding and her 3 grandchildren, were already at the door the next day. From the first few minutes they found common ground with everyone, and Jacob was surprised at how much the solitude had changed them. After a couple of hours, the grandparents were said to be chatting, while the grandmothers were running like eagles after their grandchildren, getting ahead of them minute by minute. Jacobo and Monica went quietly to the register, where Juan the detective and his girlfriend were the witnesses. When they returned, there was a table set outside under a canopy with delicacies prepared by the grandmothers, and the new grandparents were working on the tasty meats by the fire. The children fell asleep on their pillows, while the adults sat outside for a long time. It seemed that these people were very close. As the evening drew to a close, Ilya Igorovich, Ragnar's father, stood up and said with a confident voice, "Well, we thank fate that our children have had time to do something so important and necessary for us, the elderly. Jacob, Monica, thank you so much for coming into our lives. You are now like brothers to us, but grandchildren to us." After taking a sip of juice from the glass on the table, he continued, "My wife and I have talked it over and decided that we have to think about the future of the trio, and we have left them a will with everything we have and what is left of the children, so we think they have enough to live on. The main thing is to raise them to be intelligent and correct people, like you." When Ilya Igorovich finished, Jacob stood up, looked enigmatically at everyone at the table, and said, "Well, since we have such a solemn day and an evening of revelations, Olenka and I also want to say that we have thought about it. We have decided that we're 4 children will be happy." "Yes," beloved Monica smiled happily and, kissing her husband, replied, "Yes, my love. Most of all, we are having a girl, which means our family count will be 22. After this news, the grandparents had tears of joy in their eyes, and for some reason began to congratulate the not-so-young A.